Why would a president take an unusual route past a cemetery after a security meeting? What he discovered there, a poor girl named Divine, would not only change her life forever, but also expose a betrayal in the highest levels of power. How did this young girl's question about a routine presidential task uncover corruption no one saw coming? Stay tuned to uncover the full story of how she saved a leader and a nation. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. It had been an exhausting day for President Ibrahim Traoré. After hours spent locked in a tense security briefing, where every detail of the country's challenges was dissected, he emerged looking thoughtful but weary. Amid conversations about national security and daily governance, his motorcade was scheduled to return him to the presidential palace along the usual heavily guarded route. But this time, as the convoy began to move, he gave an unusual instruction. He wanted the driver to take a route through the quiet outskirts of the city. It wasn't safe, his security team argued, but he insisted. The new path would take them past an old, overgrown cemetery, mostly forgotten by everyone in the bustling city. Few understood why the president, always attentive to protocol, was suddenly drawn to this detour. As the convoy wound through the dusty side streets, the stillness of the cemetery seemed almost jarring compared to the chaos just miles behind them. In the distance, surrounded by rough gravestones and wild grass, a lone figure caught the president's eye. It was a girl, perhaps no older than 15, her slight frame bent as she knelt next to a simple grave. She was repairing its edges with mud and placing a small hand-picked flower on top. Her faded clothes clung to her thin frame, and the fraying scarf around her head failed to hide the toll of years of struggle. She didn't even notice the motorcade slowing to a stop at first. President Traoré stepped out despite the objections of his guards. Walking toward her, he spoke softly, startling her as she stood quickly, clutching her scarf tighter. From a few brief questions, he learned her name was Divine. She was an orphan, she explained. The grave belonged to her little brother, who had been her only family. Their parents had been taken by illness long ago, and for years she had survived on scraps, doing odd jobs when she could. Her home, she admitted with hesitation, was little more than an abandoned shed a short walk away. Something about the way she spoke, quiet but unwavering, struck him. He didn't see fear in her, despite her fragile appearance. Instead, he saw resilience. That brief encounter changed everything. President Traoré surprised everyone when he told Divine she would leave the cemetery that day, not to return to her shed, but to come with him to the palace. In the car, she sat awkwardly in the corner, still unsure of why she'd been chosen. Upon arrival at the grand gates of the presidential residence, the reactions were instant and mixed. Staff members whispered about the disheveled girl who trailed behind the president. Some speculated it was charity. Others were less generous and questioned whether she belonged in such a decorated place. Divine didn't seem to care about their whispers. She had a bed now, something she hadn't had in years. Days later, the president ensured she had clean clothes and access to food. He even arranged for tutors to begin her education. But what stood out most was her curiosity. Following her initial shyness, Divine began to explore the palace hallways, often peering into rooms where presidential advisors debated and documents shuffled. She would sometimes watch President Traoré signing papers brought to his office. To others, this was normal, a leader authorizing his work and moving on. To Divine, it wasn't. One day, after watching him glance quickly at several sheets before signing them, she finally asked the question that no one else had dared. "Why don't you read them first?" she asked innocently, baffling even the president himself. That single question lingered. It wasn't rebellious or accusatory, but it was different, so simple, yet so piercing. And it was the question that would set into motion a series of events exposing a betrayal no one saw coming. How could a single question from a young girl disrupt years of routine and expose hidden corruption at the heart of a government? For President Traoré, it all started with Divine's innocent query. "Why don't you read the papers before signing them?" At first, the question seemed like an observation born of inexperience, but it stuck with him. To Divine, it simply didn't make sense for someone with so much responsibility to approve documents without knowing their exact contents. Unknowingly, she had pointed to a flaw in the way the palace operated, a flaw dangerously exploited by those closest to the president. That evening, President Traore privately returned to some of his recent documents. For years, he'd relied on his aides to ensure everything was in order before they reached his desk. The trust he had placed in his team, particularly his longtime personal assistant, Mr. Gerard, was unquestionable. But as he read through one particular file, something seemed off. A large sum of money, 3 billion CFA francs, had been approved for transfer to a private company. The name of the company wasn't familiar to him, and its listed address appeared incomplete. As he read further, inconsistencies surfaced. The approval stamp was his, but he couldn't recall signing off on it. The director's signature, too, seemed unusual. Unsure of what he was looking at, Traoré directed his investigative team to examine the matter further. They uncovered shocking details. The company didn't exist. Its address was fabricated, and the signature of the director had been forged. Most alarmingly, the transfer's approval chain pointed back to Mr. Gerard. He was responsible for verifying documents before presenting them to the president, a role that required the highest level of professionalism and trust. All signs indicated that Gerard had not only facilitated the fraudulent transaction, but had likely been involved in other such schemes. To say it was a betrayal would be an understatement. The investigation didn't stop with Gerard. As the team analyzed more documents, other questionable approvals came to light, exposing a deeper web of deceit. Missing funds meant that critical infrastructure projects had been delayed or outright abandoned. Public workers went unpaid while private accounts quietly swelled. A growing list of officials, many of whom had earned the president's trust, were implicated. The magnitude of the betrayal sent shockwaves through the palace and beyond. For President Traoré, this was no ordinary political scandal. It was deeply personal. He had given his inner circle his complete trust, operating under the belief that his advisors had the nation's best interests at heart. "I take full responsibility for trusting too much and reading too little," he admitted during a press conference. The admission was weighty, underscoring the toll the revelation had taken. The knowledge that such corruption had thrived under his leadership was a difficult burden to carry. Divine, in the meantime, became an unintended voice of guidance. Her question wasn't shrugged off as naivety, but instead inspired a significant overhaul in the inner workings of the palace. Traoré introduced practices that demanded greater accountability. Advisors now needed to fully explain documents, and the inclination to blindly trust established systems was replaced with a culture of thoroughness and transparency. Divine herself became something of an informal advisor, noticing details others missed. Far from threatening the officials she observed, her input began to reshape their respect for precision. The first major step in this reform was Gerard's arrest. Removed from his position and faced with overwhelming evidence, his downfall was the strongest signal yet that there would be no tolerance for betrayal. Not everyone in the palace was ready to embrace this shift, though. Divine's growing presence in decision-making started to spark resentment among some senior staff. Not everyone appreciated the changes she inspired, even as they brought undeniable accountability. Shadows of opposition began to gather, but as Divine's influence grew, so did the hope for what the presidency could achieve. How does someone go from being an unknown orphan to becoming a trusted advisor and a target for powerful figures in a matter of months? Divine's appointment as a special advisor wasn't formal at first. It began quietly with her sitting in on discussions or asking curious questions about the documents that now required more scrutiny. But something changed as her observations proved sharp and her instincts accurate. She quickly became a vital voice in the palace's efforts to reform its practices, and President Traoré made her role official. Ministers began presenting files more carefully, prepared for the unexpected questions she might raise, and government officials started facing real accountability for their actions. The shift wasn't subtle. Divine's presence made it harder for anyone to cut corners. Projects required clear explanations, spending had to be justified, and irregularities couldn't be buried under bureaucracy. For President Traoré, this revitalized the palace's focus on integrity, but not everyone appreciated these changes. Some workers, long accustomed to minimal oversight, began grumbling about her influence. Whispers started to spread, mocking the idea of an uneducated girl holding such responsibility and claiming she was overstepping her place. At first, the opposition stayed in the shadows. Disgruntled remarks, rolled eyes in meetings, polite dismissals of her concerns. But as the palace grew more transparent and the president tightened control over operations, the resentment deepened. Those caught in questionable activities, including falsifying reports or directing funds to dubious accounts, began losing both their privileges and their patience. Anonymous rumors started to surface, painting Divine as disruptive and pushing the narrative that she only brought chaos. Some accused her of being a foreign spy, an absurd claim, but one that gained traction in certain corners, where those resistant to change clung to anything they could weaponize. The threats went beyond words. One night, walking through the palace garden, Divine noticed a man dressed as staff following her at a distance. Unease crept in as his steps grew closer. Before she could react, a guard intercepted him, finding a knife hidden in his jacket. Under pressure, the man admitted that he had been sent by a powerful official who had recently lost lucrative building contracts after Divine's scrutiny revealed fraud. It wasn't the only attempt. Small accidents or misplaced items designed to intimidate her happened more frequently. Each time, Divine quietly endured, refusing to back down from the work that had become her mission. Through it all, President Traore became her shield. When accusations of espionage surfaced, he publicly dismissed them, saying, "Divine, you came to me with nothing but truth. I don't believe them, and I never will." His unwavering defense sent a message. Attacks on Divine were attacks on him. He made her safety a priority, ensuring she couldn't be isolated or cornered. But while his support drew a clear line, it also deepened the resentment against her, especially from those who believed the president was showing her too much favor. The opposition reached its boiling point with the betrayal of Emmanuel, President Traore's childhood friend. Emmanuel had long been by the president's side, a companion through war, victory, and governance. But not even that bond could survive ambition and jealousy. Emmanuel conspired with a corrupt official to rid the palace of Divine, fearing her growing influence would continue to expose their activities. The plan was straightforward: poison her tea, making it look like an illness. Late one evening, Divine inadvertently uncovered the ploy while overhearing whispers near the kitchen. Confronting a nervous worker holding the prepared tea, it didn't take long for him to confess. The revelations led to the arrests of Emmanuel and his co-conspirator. Emmanuel's betrayal cut deeply for the president, forcing him to confront the painful truth that trust, even when earned over decades, could be misplaced. Traore publicly addressed the incident, saying, "Not everyone who smiles with you is your friend. Sometimes your greatest enemy wears the face of your closest companion." Despite the heartbreak, the arrest reinforced the palace's message. Betrayal would be confronted no matter how close to home it struck. As the dust settled, one thing stood clear. Divine's courage, coupled with the president's support, had reshaped the palace. It wasn't just about weeding out corruption. It was about proving that no matter how entrenched wrongdoing became, integrity could still prevail. Divine's journey from a forgotten orphan to a key figure in national leadership serves as a powerful reminder that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected voices. Her story is more than just one of survival. It's a testament to the unseen potential in those whom society overlooks. By challenging President Traore's long-standing habits, she didn't just expose corruption. She reshaped the nation's approach to justice and integrity. True leadership, as this story reveals, is not defined solely by authority, but by an ability to listen. Perhaps the greatest strength lies in recognizing wisdom, no matter where or from whom it arises.